Yes, good afternoon. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you today. I must thank Biopta and the organizers of this symposium because I am filled with a wealth of information and only hope to be able to contribute more. A beautiful quote from Wolfgang Goethe. And in the interest of time, I'll move forward. The International Institute for the Advancement of Medicine, IIAM, the main mission here is to provide non-transplantable human tissues for the sake of medical research, education, and development. The benefits of human tissue for research are vast, as evidenced by many of the speakers previously seen here today. In addition to transplantation, this provides yet another option for donor families. And many times these donor families are in extreme circumstances, in unforeseen circumstances where they've just recently suffered the loss of a loved one. They know formally from having spoken with their loved one that they did want to donate for transplantation and are happy to know in many cases that these tissues can be available or made available for research if not transplantable. These tissues also enable the faster development of better, safer models for all treatments of different types of diseases. And as we've heard today, the research would then be more translated or easily translated to humans. We're treating human disease, and therefore it would make most logical sense to be using human tissues. And certainly fewer animals will be used in research. We've operated for 23 years in providing all types of human tissues. These are fresh human tissues, which are, there are all categories, normal and diseased tissues. These are usually whole organs and tissues, as would be recovered by transplant teams. They are serologically tested, and they are adopting the same test that would be used for the organs that are being tested for transplantation. And they are, of course, being authorized, consented to be used for research, education, and development. IIAM consists of two divisions, but for the sake of our time and applicability here today, I'll only talk about the organ division. As of this year, we're pacing to receive approximately 9,000 organs, 9,000 referrals of non-transplantable organs that are authorized for research. We operate, and you will see the increase, a vast increase over the years. We operate in the already established network of organ recovery for transplantation. In the United States, there's pretty much a separate OPO to cover each different region. So there's almost one OPO, more than one OPO per state. Of the 58 organ procurement organizations in the United States, IIAM is networking and working continually on a daily basis with 50 of them. We do organ placement for research 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We operate on the same clock as do the organ procurement organizations who are recovering organs for transplantation. These organs are particularly invaluable to researchers for two big reasons. Number one, they are fresh. They are delivered directly from the organ recovery site. They, I might add, are more often than not being recovered by the same people using the same preservation methods, the same recovery techniques, and the same shipping practices as are the organs for transplantation. So they will be recovered and delivered to the researcher directly from the OR, directly to the client, within 8 to 24 hours. I promised that I would talk a little bit more about the OPOs, and I will. They are the front line for organ donation for transplantation, and I was pleased to have worked for 3 years for the New York Organ Donor Network, largely responsible for hospital education. Hospital staff know a great deal about how to transplant organs, but they don't know how one of their patients necessarily presents as a potential candidate for organ donation for transplantation. That was my main role. So in the United States, there is a mandate that every hospital must call their particular OPO in their region when there is a potential organ donor for transplantation. Typically, these patients are ventilated and present with a Glasgow Coma Scale of under 6. I should say that most of them have suffered some kind of head trauma, some kind of blunt injury to the head. They might have fallen. It could be as a result of some anoxic event where they have completely lost breath for more than 10 to 15 minutes. It could be the event of a gunshot wound, a motor vehicle accident, a cerebral vascular accident, such as a brain stroke. The moment that the OPO is contacted by this, with this referral, one of the staff is discharged to the hospital to determine the medical suitability. At this time, first and foremost, they're going to speak with the hospital staff, the nurses and doctors in whose care the patient has been. They're going to review the medical chart. They're then going to speak with the hospital staff about facilitating the examinations for brain death, as well as any serological testing. If after a full battery of how it usually works in the United States, although even brain death certification varies on a state-by-state basis, more often than not, there are 2 full batteries of tests that are done separated by a 12-hour period, done by 2 different neurologists or neurosurgeons to determine that the patient is in fact completely legally brain dead. At the time that the family, or at this time when brain death has in fact been confirmed, the family has a few options. And at this point, if the patient has previously been noted by way of their medical suitability, their donor chart, their lab values, any kinds of x-rays, et cetera, that they could be a candidate for transplantation, the OPO will call their consent coordinator to come in. The consent coordinator can also be that person who was originally on site to clinically manage the patient and speak with the hospital staff. They will present the options of donation for transplantation. They will also mention that if the family is not amenable to donation for transplantation, that the patient would likely be disconnected from the ventilator because there is no further hope. The patient is legally dead, so there's nothing further that can be done to help them. At the same time that the conversation about consent for transplantation takes place, or consent for donation for transplant takes place, the conversation regarding consent for donation for research takes place in the event that the organs are not transplantable. So this is all happening simultaneously. Now, as I mentioned before, even about brain death policies, each state has varying policies. So while each OPO might have different policies or might have different language on their consent form or might have a different way of doing their brain death protocol, every one of them must conform to the ultimate UNOS policy. UNOS is our umbrella organization in the United States. That stands for the United Network for Organ Sharing. Okay, I'm not in touch with the order in which my slides are laid out. The United Network for Organ Sharing. They are the umbrella organization in the United States that is ultimately charged with the responsibility for the equitable allocation of organs for transplantation. There are so many guidelines guiding organ donation, particularly for transplantation in the US, but today I will just touch on a few of them. Just to touch on the UAGA, the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, I wanted you to understand that in each state has its own Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, but essentially this gives the legal right to anybody wanting to donate a part of their body at their time of death for either transplantation, medical research, education, and therapy. Perhaps most importantly, also, the UAGA mandates the order of priority given to the people that are able to provide consent for donation for transplantation, for anatomical donation, and ultimately transplantation. Now, the organ recovery coordinator or the consent coordinator, that OPO member that I referred to before, they are trained on both federal and state laws regarding anatomical donation. we're dealing with a huge country. So in my country, we're looking at 304 million people. By the way, we're 304 million people, and we have 100,000 people on our waiting list for transplantation. So I was remarking to myself that the UK is 1/5 the size, and yet their waiting list for transplantation is 1/10. So we're obviously not doing something right with regard to individual health. I understand, and having read as much as I could before coming here on the Human Tissue Act and some of the resistance there might be surrounding consent for donation, perhaps both for transplantation and research. As I was going to say in the previous slide that I'm glad I realized I did not, looking at the vast number of people, a population of over 300 million people across 50 states in the country, transplantation needs to happen fast. It requires speed and efficiency. And without that, it cannot happen. Full stop. And as such, and because of this, there is no time for each individual state to be researching the variations among each individual state law regarding transplantation and research. So the original slide about the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act was established in effect to harmonize the individual state policies with federal policy. In preparation for coming here today, I looked at least 25 different consent forms coming from 25 different OPOs of the 50 with whom we work. And there were always variations. What I can say is, well, important to remind you that consent is obtained simultaneously with consent for transplantation, consent for donation for transplantation, excuse me, and that virtually on every consent form it will say, I authorize the use of the following organs for transplantation. If in the event the organs are not transplantable, I authorize the use of the following organs for medical research, science, education, and therapy. So I did see some variations, some that included for commercial use, for profit organizations or companies, for cosmetic use, for international placement. And this, while on some forms, it certainly was not on all forms, as it's not required. Every organ for research that's accepted by us at IIAM must be documented on the consent form. I would like to give you a snapshot view of the role of the placement coordinator at IIAM. So the OPO has this wonderful gift from the family of organs for transplantation, and they've also learned that certain organs are not transplantable and have been consented for research. They call the research partner, IIAM, and they provide all the pertinent information. So the PC, the placement coordinator at IIAM, is responsible for screening all the information, verifying consent, asking if there are any restrictions. If so, these restrictions are abided. If there are no restrictions, then there are no restrictions. The PC, the placement coordinator, will review all donor medical information. At that point, they will contact the appropriate researcher. So we get a full list of the researcher's criteria, what type of organ they need from what type of donor, in what kind of time frame, etc. Our PCs will call out to those researchers with whose criteria we match. If we do not have a researcher who needs that particular organ, we call back the organ procurement organization and tell them do not recover any organs for research. So if we cannot guarantee the placement of the organ for research, the organ is simply not recovered. However, more often than not, fortunately, we are, well, or perhaps, anyway, So the PC notifies the OPO after calling the researcher, locating a client. They'll call back the OPO and say, when you go to the OR to recover those organs for transplantation, we need the bladder, we need the right kidney, and the right kidney for research. We will arrange for a courier to be outside the OR to pick up that organ and get it on a plane to the researcher. At that point, the placement coordinator must send over the recovery protocol to the organ recovery team and arrange for the courier. Soon thereafter, we create a donor demographic form, which is complete with the information that was relayed to the research client over the phone, and the client is invoiced. IIAM operates on a cost recovery basis through fees for services rendered. So that OPO, those transplant surgeons, that OR time is going to charge us IIAM, and that cost is passed on to the researcher. But we are a not-for-profit, and you would be amazed at how inexpensive the tissue actually is, and how invaluable the gift is, as already been said. In short, the client application process is as follows. Nobody could possibly receive any organs for research from IIAM without us having a biomaterial transfer agreement completed and approved. So this application, this BMTA, must prove scientific and medical merit. It has to have an appropriate use of tissue, as we know would be intended by the donor family, and it has to be feasible for us to recover. Then the application is distributed through to two committees, our internal review committee and an independent external review committee. It's approved within 1 to 2 weeks. There have been times where it's approved within 1 to 2 weeks, and immediately that day the research client can enter into our placement rotation to receive referrals of non-transplantable organs that have been consented for research. There have been times where we have gone to our ethics review committee. So whenever there's a question about the purpose of the research, we will by all means go to the ethics review committee, consisting of a medical director, our executive director, a couple of the directors from a few OPOs, as well as transplant recipient and donor family members. Our placement coordinators are then briefed on each new researcher's criteria, and they are entered onto a list that's updated and transmitted to us every day by way of email. Quick snapshot of our demographics. We have 61% of our research clients are both biotech and in the pharmaceutical industry, and 39% doing from the academics. Last slide, purposes of research. Initially, the slide I wanted to be for long. I sent it to David too long, and or 2 slides long, and now it's been cut to 1. It's okay. I wanted just to give you an idea. Heart and aorta are often used to develop arterial plaque excision devices, as well as heart valve devices. Spleen for B-tolerance studies, adrenal glands to study the influence of hormones on cardiovascular disease. Essentially, every organ that we receive is used to isolate, or that is given to a client for research, is used to isolate cells and study precursors to diseases. Last month, I would like you to know that we've worked with with a lung researcher for 13 years. In the last 3 years, he changed the design of his study. Last month, he called and he let us know that in the past 3 years of studying a certain type of, or lungs in a certain criteria, both normal and diseased, he was able to he found a receptor that he believes is soon to unlock a hopeful cure to asthma. We also have a dedicated researcher whose child, for example, is suffering with type 1 diabetes, and is diligently working to unlock some kind of cure for this disease. We've all heard about the purposes of research, and I would remind you, though, to the donor families as well as to the medical research community, And if you would like to contact me, I would love for you. My name is Dolores Baldassar. That is my email address. I failed to mention that I put packets in the back of the room that look like this. They contain sample screening forms, applications to become a research client, as well as other pertinent facts that I thought would be helpful for you. Thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.